Hi, welcome to Biblical Explorations. I'd like to apologize for not getting back to my study of Genesis for the past few weeks, but I've had 2 weeks in Galilee where there was no time. Then my family came for a couple weeks and to visit in Israel, and then I went to Jordan for a week. So I'm just now kind of recovering from all of the trips I've been taking, and I'd like to take a look at some new insights, hopefully, into Genesis. First, I'd like to mention a couple books that have been published recently that are quite helpful and insightful in the study of Genesis. The first one is The Lost World of Genesis 1. It's by John Walton, and basically what he does is attempts to contextualize Genesis chapter 1 in an ancient context, from ancient ideas, ancient science, and so forth, and also to kind of move Genesis away from fundamentalist evangelical creationist ideas. He himself is an evangelical, I think, but he wants to kind of free the study of Genesis from the debate about origins and Darwin and all those types of things. Mainly he looks at, however, how Genesis was understood in its ancient Near Eastern context. The second book, which is very nice, is The Priestly Vision of Genesis 1. This book is by Mark Smith, a great scholar of the Hebrew Bible. And what he tries to do is look at Genesis 1 from the context of Israelite priesthood and the concerns and ideas of Israelite priesthood. And he looks at it by all sorts of comparisons with biblical and non-biblical texts, and it's really quite an insightful and helpful work. So if you're interested in pursuing a study of Genesis, I strongly recommend you get both of those books, take a look at them, see what they have to say. They both present a number of insights. Also, I forgot to mention, the first book, Lost World of Genesis 1, also tries to contextualize Genesis 1 as a temple text. That is to say, he relates what's going on in the book of Genesis with what goes on in the Israelite temple and how those two concepts are combined together. So, I strongly recommend taking a look at those two books. Now let's turn to the next verse in Genesis, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 6. First, we'll take a look at the Hebrew. I think we're going to do a little bit less now with Greek and Hebrew, or Greek and Latin, unless they strongly differ from or supplement and complement our ideas about the Hebrew here. So let's begin. Vayomar Elohim, and said, or spoke God, so God said, Yehi Raq'ia. Now, this follows the same pattern as the previous verse. God says something, and in this case it is he says, let there be, or is, Raq'ia. Now the question is, what's a Raq'ia? And we'll get to that in just a second. But the Raq'ia is now placed within a specific context. There's a Raq'ia bitoch hamayim. Now that's kind of interesting. It is, bitoch means in the midst of, or among, or something like that. And you can see over here in English, God said, let there be a dome. Now they translate Raq'ia as dome here. In the midst, bitoch hamayim, the waters. What waters is he talking about? Well, it's the only waters that have been mentioned is there's a formless void, there's a deep, and God's Spirit upon the face of the waters. So he's talking about these primordial cosmic waters that we discussed back in verse 2. So he's created, the waters exist, he creates the light, and now he starts to mold and change the waters, and he does so by placing a Raq'ia in the midst of the water. So in the middle of the water, he puts a Raq'ia. Now what exactly this Raq'ia is, we still got to get back to. So let's now return to verse 6 and take a look. So there is this Raq'ia. It is in the midst of the waters, in the middle of the waters. And here's what it does. Wayahi, and it was mabdil. Now this is a kind of a participle, but it means it is to serve as a separator. Its function was to separate. So it's mabdil bein mayim limayim. So it is a separator, something to separate between the waters to the waters. Now that's a Hebrew idiom to say it separates the waters from waters, and that's how we get it in English. It separates the waters from the waters. So what it does is, how I would kind of more basically translate it, it divides the water from the water. It divides the water in two, or at least into two parts. perhaps not equal. So there is a Raqi'a made. Now notice, at this point, it doesn't have anything to do with the heavens. It's simply a barrier. It is, now let's take a look at the Hebrew translation here. Raqi'a in the Halot, the most contemporary scholarly encyclopedia, is firmament, a sky or firmament. Now, it's translated firmament in the old King James. It tends to be translated dome now. It is associated with a beaten metal plate. It is the vault of heaven, and he says it's understood as a gigantic heavenly dome. So there's this big Raqi'a, but I would say more basically it is a barrier or a separator or something that is firm and solid that divides something from something, in this case the waters from the waters. So the Raqi'a here is a barrier, this Raqi'a, it divides waters from waters. Now, what these waters are and how they're divided doesn't come into play until verse 7. But at this point, the next thing that God does is he says, let there be a Raqi'a, this barrier, this firmament, this divider, in the middle of the waters, in the midst of the waters, that divides the waters from the waters. That's its purpose. It's a separator, it's a barrier, it divides. So, this verse is basically talking about something that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense in modern cosmologies. But when we go on to verse 7, we'll see that in fact it does, because it is associated with the way the ancients viewed the universe.